Hey everyone, Reflected here. And today I would like to deep dive into some of the triggers and conditions that I use in the DCS Mission Editor. I hope you'll find it interesting. So last week I released a video about how I make a campaign, the process, what's behind all of it. And I got a lot of really nice comments, such good feedback. I really thank you so much for all the support. It means a lot to me. I also got some feedback about, like, some of you would be interested in going into more details, like in terms of triggers and all of that. So I thought about making a tutorial on the Mission Editor, but there are just so many aspects that I couldn't possibly cover it. Definitely not under, let's say, 2 hours, and even I would be bored to death watching that. So instead of that, I thought I would just simply go through all the triggers and conditions that I use most often in DCS. That would already be helpful. And then I started thinking about a structured way to present all of that, but I couldn't come up with anything because there are just so many. So what I will do, I will just go through them one by one and talk about each just a little bit, give you some advice on how to use it, where, what to pay attention to. So I hope it will help you with future projects when you make missions. So in DCS, basically there are two places where you can make stuff happen. Either triggers or waypoint tasks. Let's place an aircraft here. Yeah, let it be a 109. A couple of waypoints. Okay. So as you see, there's this little field here where that you can populate with extra tasks. Waypoint 0 is already populated with a couple of default ones to make sure the AI behaves as intended, but you can delete some of these or add new ones. Now there's a couple of things I'd like to set up at waypoint 0, because waypoint 0 is the only waypoint that the AI is surely going to pass. Because if then you ask him to engage something or follow you or do anything, it's very easy for him to miss waypoint 1, 2, or 3. So, the only things that are certain in life are death and taxes and waypoint 0. So what I like to set up here is basic behavior. You click on add, and there are 4 subcategories: perform tasks, start en route task, perform command, set option. Perform task is, I don't set any of these up here. It's not relevant for waypoint 0. It's more for later tasks. It's more about, perform command. For example, you can set its frequency. If it's a ground unit and you want to use it as a radio station, you give a set frequency, and then you set up the frequency that you want, that you put in the kneeboard, and the player can tune into it. That's good for waypoint 0. Transmit message should be a bit later. Invisible and Immortal are super useful. Invisible, for a long time I thought it would make the plane actually invisible, but no, it means that it will not be detected by enemy forces. So you can still see the unit, but enemy forces, ground units, aircraft will pretend as if it wasn't really there. If I uncheck this, then they're visible again. And the other one is Immortal. A lot of times the mission requires some of the AI to survive, because if they die because they're shut down or they're just stupid and crash into the ground, then the whole thing goes south. Like, I always set the leader of a huge B-17 formation to Immortal, because the rest of the formation follows him, and if he's shut down by flak, I don't want to risk and see what happens. Later on, you can turn this off, of course. You can turn it off, say at waypoint 1. You click on waypoint 1, Immortal off. So it would be Immortal here, but as soon as he reaches waypoint 1, it would stop being Immortal, provided he ever reaches waypoint 1. I really like to use perform task orbit. If I want the AI to orbit over the airfield or wait for something to happen, this is a good task. You can set up the speed, the altitude, make sure you set this properly, and it matches the altitude that he used during this leg. And then if I want him to stop, I set up a stop condition like flag, whatever, 4. And if flag, I'm going to talk about flags later. If flag 4 comes on, then he will forget about the orbit task. Racetrack or circle. Circle is easier. Race, like you can be fairly sure where he's going to stay. Racetrack is, I think, I may be mistaken, but if I set racetrack here, then he's going to make a racetrack between waypoint 1 and 2. Or maybe it's a standard racetrack. I'm not sure. I don't really like using racetrack. I prefer circle because that means that I have more control over where the AI is at any given moment. As I said, you have the problem of not knowing exactly whether the AI is going to pass this waypoint, because whatever may happen during the mission. That's why you can set these extra tasks up over here. It's not linked to any specific waypoint. It's like, imagine you're setting up little tasks and put it in a bag, and you can pull it out of that bag whenever you want. So whatever you're going to use, let's say at the beginning, you make sure that the AI is weapon hold, so it's not going to attack anything, but in the bag you add weapon free. So later on you pull this out of the bag and at any moment you like, and then from then on the AI can attack stuff. And I forgot to go through the set option menu. There's a lot of very useful stuff here, and I usually use it here at waypoint 0. ROE, this is super important. Weapon free, the AI can attack stuff, or weapons hold, the AI cannot attack anything. Return fire, they're only going to engage once they are being fired at. And if they have a specific task, like attack a specific unit, you want them to bomb a jeep or something, or attack a specific airplane, you want to use only designated to make sure they don't go around and start attacking air defenses instead, or another aircraft that they deem more dangerous in this situation. They prioritize differently than you want. Or you can have priority designated, which means they should focus on the priority, but they can still attack something else. But I don't like that one. I'm gonna make sure the AI does what I want. Reaction to threat. This is super important, especially with World War II missions. I always set my units to no reaction. It means that if they're fired at by anti-aircraft guns, it's really different in World War II and modern aircrafts. In modern aircrafts, you don't want this because if there's a SAM launch, they have to react. But in World War II, without this no reaction set at waypoint 0, they're going to act as if they were fired upon by a SAM, and they can dive to ground level and do crazy stuff that completely messes up your World War II mission. So I set it to no reaction. They're just going to fly forward without blinking. And if I don't want them to die during, I don't know, crossing the coastline, or not the leader anyway, then I also set them to Immortal for that period. You could use passive defense, or no, wait, what's that? Yeah, no, wait. That's the one. Horizontal AA fire evade. That means that as soon as the flag comes on, I'm talking World War II here, the aircraft starts waving, like flying in an S pattern, left and right, but quite drastically. If I set it up, like I use proper big World War II formations, like a formation of 24 P-47s, and if I let them do this, then it's gonna be a huge mess. So it's good that we have this, but it's not really usable. I can't really make use of this one. So this is what I like to use, the no reaction. Otherwise the AI gets ideas and does crazy stuff. Radar using. If you want to pop bandits that sneak up on the player or something like that, make sure you click never use. Otherwise, as soon as they spawn, they're going to paint the player. And then later on, you put another task in the bag, you remember, here. Use for search if required, or continuous search, whatever you want, and then that enables them to use their radar. Chaff flare using. This is quite useful for training missions. Like when I have in my Zone 5 campaign, when there's a 1v1 guns only. Without this, the AI, even though it's a guns only, and in real life they would never use chaff and flare, just keeps pumping out chaffs and flare, and it's quite annoying. So I set it to never use. Although last time I checked, it was bugged and the AI ignored this setting. Maybe it's fixed now, I hope so. We'll see. Formation. This is also what you want to set up here. This is really important. For example, echelon right, echelon left would be good for modern aircraft starting in close formation, or for World War II units. I could use finger 4, like close, but I found that World War II fighter Vic, and set it to close. It's actually a closer formation, which is more accurate for World War II. Of course, Vic formations were made of 3 aircraft, but if you add the 4th one, that's going to be quite a good representation of a finger 4 in World War II. Or if you have a bomber formation, then I use this one. For early war, I use close. For 1944-45, you want the B-17s to be further apart a little bit. And again, I used to think that I had to set it up at each waypoint in my early missions, and that was quite annoying. But no, as soon as you set it up at waypoint 0, unless you tell them otherwise later, they're going to stick to this. RTB on bingo fuel or out of ammo. The AI's fuel consumption is really out of hand. It's a disaster. So you may want to set this up, RTB on bingo fuel off. So even if they run out of fuel, and which they will do way before you do, without this they would decide to abort and go home, and then whatever you set up in the mission will not happen because they're out of fuel. But if you set this up, then they'll keep flying the mission until they run out of fuel, and then they die. That's another problem, but that's maybe a smaller problem. Out of ammo, same stuff. Silence. This is quite useful, especially in World War II. Silence on, because on one hand you have modern day radio chatter which can break the immersion, but ED just announced that they're working on World War II radio chatter, like built-in radio. That's a great addition. I'm really looking forward to that. But the other problem is that the AI calls out each bandit, and in a modern day situation when it meets one enemy aircraft, your wingman calls 2 Taliban at 12 o'clock. That's cool. But in World War II, when let's say you bounce a big formation of 30 Focke-Wulfs, your wingman is going to call out 30 times, 2 Telebandits, 12 o'clock, 2 Telebandit, 12 o'clock, on repeat. It's super annoying. So for now, until we have that big radio update, I usually just set my wingman to silent. You can still use the built-in radio menu, so you can tell them to join up or engage bandits, whatever. They just won't reply, but they will still obey your orders. ECM using, pretty straightforward. Restrict, you can restrict stuff. Restrict afterburner would be a good idea to set up, because then the AI won't burn so much fuel, and then you can enable him to use afterburner later on. Or restrict air-to-ground attack. I think it's already set up by default here. Yeah, this is quite a useful one, because sometimes I've set up air-to-air missions only to see my wingman just peel off and attack flag guns. I'm like, what the hell? It's really useful. Missile attack ranges. If you want, like you're in a specific situation and you want the AI to engage only when they're really close or from really far. Let's say in Mission 7 of my Fear the Bones campaign, when Tomcats are scrambled because there are like 20 backfires headed towards the fleet and they want to sink the carrier, you want them to launch their Phoenix missiles from as far as possible. So I add one of these tasks, max range launch. Or for example, the wild card in Zone 5. I want the wild card to bounce the player's flight and only fire from up close in order to give the player a chance to spot it, call it out, and escape. I set up no escape launch. Pretty straightforward. No report waypoint pass. If you have an AI flight that's not yours, they will call out, I don't know, Uzi 1 passing waypoint 2 at 22,000. It's quite useless and annoying, but an easier way is just, like, I never have any AI flights on the same frequency as the player. That prevents all of this from happening. Then you don't have to set these up, only for your flight. Radio usage when contact, when engaged, 2 Taliban at 12 o'clock. I'm not sure these work properly. Jettison fuel tanks when empty, straightforward. This one, override AI attack avoidance decisions. This is hyper important. So let me explain. The World War II AI recently got a feature, and I was pulling my hair out. My Wolfpack missions that I set up and tested a million times, the engagements played out as planned, and then all of a sudden after one update I played the same mission, 24 P-47s, and then on our 3 o'clock there were like 15 190s. They were called out. Then I gave the AI permission to attack. They would just peel off and attack and engage. That was so nice. But after that update, as soon as they were told to attack, they just turned left the other way and flew away from the 190s. What the hell is happening? And I saw more and more of these anomalies of, like, some aircraft would engage, some would turn tail and run like brave Sir Robin. And then it turns out it's a new World War II AI feature. I imagine it would be quite useful in, I don't know, a dynamic campaign situation where you just place an enemy unit somewhere and it should or should not engage depending on the situation. It should evaluate. Yeah, maybe then it would be useful, but in a scripted campaign where you script the events and you want something to happen, having the AI to have the final word, like have the opportunity, the capability to override any command you give him and decide that, sorry, I'm not gonna attack, I changed my mind. That was a disaster, and for half a year we had to live with that. But then we got this. So if you add this to waypoint 0, make sure it's on, override AI attack avoidance decisions. So that means the AI should do whatever you tell him to do. He doesn't have the final word anymore. And that's great. That's a lifesaver. It doesn't impact modern day aircraft. So if you have a World War II mission, only then it is important, but very important. So these are, at waypoint 0, you want to set up like behavioral tasks that you want to be true throughout the mission, or maybe changed later on. And if you want something to be done later on, then you put it in the bag here. Like, I don't know, at some point I want him to perform task, aerobatics, whatever, loop, and I call it loop, yay. So I have this task, loop, and as soon as I pull it out of the bag, wherever I want in the mission, depending on another former event or where the aircraft is on the map, or I'll talk about it later, then I just pull this out of the bag, and then the AI does his loop. So this is one way to make stuff happen, but I use these less than the other one that I'm going to show you, which is the triggers. If you click here, you have triggers. Here you add the line. You can name it in any way. I don't know, engagement. You can give it a color, because in a mission I have hundreds of trigger lines, and I'm quite messy. I don't like playing with colors, and some people even have a title trigger like this, engagement, and then when they add new ones, it's like a title here, and it makes it easier to find. I'm too messy for that. I don't do that, but you can do if you want. And each trigger has a condition and an action. Like, if something is happening or some conditions are met, then something should happen. Pretty straightforward. It's like an if function in Excel, if that means anything to you. Let's just go through. There's a whole bunch of things. You can go really creative. There's such a wide variety of them. It's really only a matter of creativity. All of coalition in zone, group in zone. I'm going to talk about these later, because these are sub-variants of something I use a lot. Bomb in zone. When I mean zone, these are trigger zones. Here, you can place a trigger zone and call it whatever, bomb. You can adjust the size in feet, whatever. Oh, it disappeared because it wasn't complete. So, bomb in zone. Let's say the player is equipped with whatever, Mark 20 bombs, and you want something to happen as soon as a bomb is in the air. So while it's still attached to your plane, it won't trigger. Like, you fly into this zone with this bomb still attached, nothing happens. But as soon as you let it go, you drop it, then this condition is met. It's useful when, for example, the AI attacks, or the player has to attack something, a target that you cannot be sure they hit, and if they miss it, then you don't want the next actions to depend on whether or not the player hits the target. But with this, you can be sure that the attack happened and the player dropped their bombs. You see what I mean? Cargo unhooked, we don't really use that. Coalition has airdrome, helipad, it's more for multiplayer. Flag equals, yeah, the flags. I have to go here first to talk about flags. Flags are, yeah, like you can turn them on and turn them off, and they all have a number and they have a value. So if something happens, let's say in our example, the player drops the bomb, and 10 seconds later, you want, or maybe 2 seconds later, you want a radio call, bombs away. You don't want it to happen as soon as the bomb drops for some reason. If you set it up like this and you have the message here, bombs away, then as soon as it's dropped, you're going to hear the call. But then you turn flag 1 on and add the new line and select time since flag. So times how many seconds? Like 2 seconds. Is this what I said? Since flag 1. Then you have a sound, a message, whatever, bombs away. So you turn on the flag, and from then on, X, Y, Z, seconds later, you can have other stuff happen. Or, for example, you want something to happen when the player lands at home base. Let's say the player starts from here, flies here, drops the bomb, and goes back. And you want something to happen when he returns to base. And you can do that in many ways, like you add another zone here, whatever, RTB. So when the player is in this zone, that means he returned to base. And I don't know, the speed is 0 or altitude is 0. But then the trigger would fire at mission start because the player starts here with 0 speed and 0 altitude, and you don't want that to happen. You want it to happen after he dropped the bomb. So we have this trigger here. So as soon as the player drops bombs here within this zone, we have flag 1 on. And then for the next one, you combine the conditions. Unit, inside zone, player, or whatever you call the unit, RTB, then they get a message, mission complete. But you had another condition, flag is true, flag 1 is true, which means the bombs have already been dropped. So when you add more conditions, that's like an AND logical link. So this and this are true. You can even combine stuff like or, and then you add some more conditions. You can really complicate the triggers. Sometimes I make such complicated triggers, and when a month later I go back and check it out because something is not working, I have to just look at it and think about it because I have no idea what I did there. So yeah, those are flags. Flag is true or flag is false. You can turn flags on or off. Flag is false, 1. Depends on what you want. Flags, I mostly turn flags on and off and play around with those. Maybe it doesn't make a whole lot of sense the way I explain it, but as soon as you start using them, they're super easy and useful and a brilliant idea in the DCS Mission Editor. But flag equals, it can have a value. For example, what I sometimes use, flag, set random value. So let's say flag 2 and set it to a value between 1 or 5 or 1 or 6 because we are rolling the dice. So it just rolls the dice for us when this condition is met, and flag 2 will be turned on one hand, and then it will have a value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6, and then later on we can have a condition flag equals flag 2 equals, let's say 4, and then something happens. So for example, when the player drops the bomb, you want an enemy aircraft to come, but maybe not. And you want a 50% chance of that happening. So then you set the flag value minimum 1, maximum 2. So it's either 1 or 2, 50-50. And if the flag is either 1 or 2, your call, then something happens. If the flag is set to 1, then it doesn't happen. It's really useful when you make single missions that that you want to play and replay, when you want to focus on replayability. So when you play the mission the next time, the outcome should be different. Of course, in a scripted campaign where each event is surrounded with dozens of voiceovers and everything, random events are not really an option, because it's like branching the mission, and it just exponentially multiplies all the voiceovers and trigger lines. But in some missions you want to use this, the flag equals and the random value. You can have a flag equal another flag is false or less than something, more than something. The possibilities are endless. Group alive, don't use it much often. It can be like a sub condition, like you have a condition, but also that group should be alive less than, and then you give a percentage. I use it when there's a target, and let's say the target is made of 10 trucks, and as soon as one of them are hit, I want something to happen, like a call saying good hit. Then you select the trucks. Okay, this is not the trucks, but whatever. And less than whatever, 99% or maybe 90, and then the call comes, good hit. Group dead. Let's say as soon as all the aircraft are shut down from the enemy group, there's something. It can be useful, but in my campaigns, I really don't like to set up success criteria depending on what the player shoots down or doesn't shoot down. It's just not realistic. It's not like real life is not a video game, so it's not like if you don't shoot down all 4 enemies, then you cannot go and fight another day. Not realistic, but for your purposes, it may be important. Group dead, yeah, LUA, no idea what that means. Map object is dead, missile in zone. This is quite useful. Let's say you're facing whatever, a MiG-21, and as soon as they launch, because your ROE is return fire, as soon as they launch, you want a radio call. Oh shit, the MiG's opened fire, requesting permission to return fire. Then you have a zone where the missile should hit. If it's a dynamic scenario, you want the zone to be quite big to make sure the missile is launched within the zone. Or it can be an SA-6 missile, whatever. Let's say SA-6. Let's say here's a SAM site, an SA-6 site, and as soon as there's a SAM launch, you want the RIO to call out, SAM launch! So as soon as there's an SA-6 missile in the zone called bomb, then the condition is met. Or you can increase it to 2, because 1 should not trigger it yet. Depends on what you want. Mission score, I hate mission scores. I have no idea what this means. And this one, yeah, same as all of coalition zone, all of group in zone. You can have part of coalition in zone, part of group in zone. I will talk about this later. Scores, hate scores. Unit argument in range, random, signal flare, time less, time more. These can be used for timing purposes, but I would rather use timestamp flag. I talked about this before. If you have an event in the mission that's easily identifiable, like when the player drops the bombs, or when the enemy dies, or when the player reaches a certain point of the map, then you turn the flag on, give it a number, and then timestamp that flag, you have a message. Or maybe a voiceover comes 10 seconds later, I don't know, bombs away. That voiceover lasts 1 second, and then 3 seconds later, so let's clone this. Clone is your best friend. So it lasts 1 second, and then 2 seconds later, you want to reply like, cool, let's get out of here. And then you can have whole conversations set up with this timestamp flag, timestamp flag, timestamp flag. You don't really want to use a lot of time here, because the more time you allow for things to happen, like timestamp flag, and then 5 minutes later, you have to be quite sure what the player is going to be doing 5 minutes later. And the longer the time frame, the less sure you can be what the player is doing. So you may want to consider adding another trigger zone. So when the player enters that zone, there's a new flag, and then the conversation starts based on that flag. I hope you know what I mean. Unit alive, unit damaged, unit dead, hits. These are quite useful. Pretty straightforward. Like, I don't know, when an enemy aircraft is shut down. Unit dead is when it crashes. And in World War II missions, it can be like a bit of an immersion breaker. Like, I want to call, let's say, good shooting. And if I set this up, like the enemy aircraft is dead, of course you don't want it to happen exactly at that moment, because that would be unrealistic. But you set up a flag, whatever, 62, and then timestamp flag, 62, like, I don't know, 3 seconds later, the wingman reacts and says, good shooting. Problem is, when you hit it with a, I don't know, a Sidewinder, it may happen instantly, and that's cool. But in World War II, the unit is really dead only when it crashes into the ocean or into the ground, and that can take a while. Like, I've seen World War II AIs just glide around like with a reminiscent of a high-performance glider, and then or they just spiral down very slowly, and 30 seconds later they crash, and by that time the player would have no idea what that message is referring to. So in World War II, I sometimes use unit damaged. It means that hits are scored, and usually when hits are scored, especially if the AI scores hits, a couple of seconds later, that target will be dead. So I turn on the flag, and then maybe a little bit later, like 7 seconds later, I say good shooting. Unit hits. This is also quite useful. Just like this, you wouldn't understand why we need unit hits when, of course, when the unit is hit, then it is damaged. And what's the point of having these? Training missions. So when, let's say, in the Zone 5 campaign, the player is set to Immortal, because if he's shot out of the sky in the first 30 seconds of the engagement, that would be quite boring. So he's set to Immortal, but I still want to sense and know when the player is hit, so I can tell him you're out of the game, fly back to wherever and wait for the others to finish the exercise, and then you can go RTB together. So that's when I use unit hits. Hits number 1, 2, 3. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, but the way I set it up, the thing is, if the player is hit once, okay, let's say over the range when the engagement begins, I know that's when I turn on flag is true, flag is true. Where are you? That's when I turn on flag 50, let's say. So flag 50 means the player is over the range, the engagement has begun. That's one condition. And then the player is hit. But what if during taxiing, the player hits a soldier, a ground soldier, with its wing or something? That also counts as a hit. So as soon, and the game remembers this, so as soon as he's over the range, then both criteria are met, and then he'll get the message, you're shut down. But that's not true. So what I do is, I give it a flag, unit hit once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. I give it a couple, flag on, and then I add the new one, time since flag. I don't know, 5 seconds later, I can turn the flag off. 62. So it means that the player is hit for the first time, flag 62 comes on. Oh wait, this is really important. I forgot to talk about this. These can happen once, or at mission start, repetitive action, I don't really use it, or switch condition. So as soon as the criteria is met again, it happens again. Whereas these are just like single shots. It happens and then never again. It happened and it's over. So every time there's a flag 62, 5 seconds later, it's turned off. And then the player is hit a second time, it comes on, but 5 seconds later, it's turned off. You'll see what I'm getting with this. So when the player is hit, for 5 seconds, flag 62 will be true. And then I can use that flag for my original purposes. So what did I say? Flag is true 50, like my criteria or whatever you set up. When you know the engagement is happening. And also flag is true 62. It means the engagement is happening and that's when the player got hit. Then you turned another flag on, a new one, whatever. And then 2 seconds later, the controller calls, you're dead or something. So that's why I use unit hits, because it registers even if the player is immortal. If the player is immortal and I use unit damaged, it's not gonna fire because, of course, immortal can never get damaged. Unit inside zone and inside moving zone, or outside zone, outside moving zone, these are the ones maybe I use the most often. This is super cool. Zones. Let's say the player starts here and as soon as he passes the airfield, or I don't know, he has to land at the airfield or whatever, as soon as he enters this zone, the trigger will fire. The condition is met. There are circular zones. It's really useful if you want to play with distances. Let's say I want a radio call saying you're 1 mile from the airfield. Then you convert 1 mile into feet. I have no idea. I'm just going to write a number. I think like 6,000, whatever. Or, yeah, it's quite small. So let's use 1 mile from whatever this point, whatever the center point is. You know the exact distance. And then when the player enters this, because he knows he has to fly to this point, when the player enters this, you say, yeah, 1 mile to target, whatever, or 2 miles. See what I mean? So circular is good because you don't exactly know if the player is going to come from here or he got lost and comes from here. You know what I mean? But the radius is, in this case, 2 miles, and that's fine. But you can also turn this zone into a rectangle quad point. Edit, and then you can you can do this. Let's say if it was a circle and I want to, let's say the player starts from here and flies here, and you want a radio call that says feet dry. You place it here, right? And as soon as the player enters, his feet dry. Oh yeah, but the player may fly this way because he got lost or spilled his coffee and didn't pay attention to the brief and flies this way. What happens then? No radio call. Okay, then you can make it really, really big. Whatever, like this. This is much more forgiving, but if the player gets lost even more, then no radio call, only much later. Of course, you can make it even bigger, but there's no point because we have quad point, edit, and then you just drag those points and make a shape that you want. Like this is fairly good. This follows the coastline very closely. So when the player is inside the zone, then he calls feet dry. Of course, the player can still go so far as like this point. You have to decide if the player starts from here, chances are he's not gonna mess up enough to miss this this huge trigger zone. But if the player starts from, let's say, here, and let's say it's the coastline of France, you have to think about your mission and give enough leeway to the player. Rectangular zones are also useful. I did this a lot in my Mozzie campaign. Let's say the player goes like this, like flying north and then west. And at this point, I want the navigator to call, okay, waypoint coming up, turn 270. Now, if I have a circular trigger zone like this, when the player enters this unit inside zone, turn 270. And I put it real close. So if the player hits the mark, then 270 will be accurate. But what if the player flies here, then it's a different, even here it's an even more different course and heading. So that's not going to work. So what I do is use a quad point. It works even if it's not like a 90-degree turn. Wait, what am I doing? Quad point. Like this. And then wherever, let's say, this is 303, true heading, but you have to figure out what's that in magnetic heading, because that's what the compass will show. But let's say it's 303. So basically the player flies north, and if it's large enough for the player not to miss it, he can enter this zone here or here. The navigator will call, okay, now turn 303, and it will be just as true here or from here. You see what I mean? So that's also a useful thing with quad point trigger zones. What else do we have? Unit inside zone, yeah. Or unit outside zone. Let's say the player takes off from Anderson, and as soon as he leaves the base, he has to check in with someone. So, unit outside zone. Unit outside zone. Player. RTB is Anderson. And then something happens. Be very careful, because if it's a late activated unit, now it's the player, but if it's another unit and it's late activated, then it will be technically outside the zone until it's activated. So when you activate it, you turn on flag, whatever, flag 5, and then you give, what is that, time since flag. So at least 10 seconds have passed since flag 5, so when the unit was activated, and then it's outside of the zone, then you can be sure that it's outside of the zone because it flew out of the zone and not because it hasn't spawned yet. There's a subvariant of unit outside zone. It's outside moving zone. Let's say this is one aircraft, Control C, Control V, and I want the player to form up on this one. Get into close formation, and let's say a close formation would be like 200 feet, and I call it formation. Of course, it helps you if you name your units. So lead, unit name, lead, and then this is player and player. Otherwise, you have aerial 1, aerial 2, aerial 3, and you will have no idea which one to select. So I want something to happen when the player forms up on this guy, and let's say within 200 feet. Then I use unit inside a moving zone. Player is within the formation zone around the lead. Then something happens. So what it does is that it takes this trigger zone. It doesn't matter where you place it on the map. So even if they're super far away, yeah, my mouse is not really working. So it just puts the center of the zone in the center of the unit, and as the unit flies on, the trigger zone follows it and flies on. So it's a moving zone. It's being dragged by the lead, and as soon as I enter that zone, so I'm within a given, like within this, in this case 200 feet, then the trigger fires, and then he says, okay, I see you formed up, or 2 formed up, 2 settled, whatever. Depends on your story, what you want to tell. So moving zone is also really important. Or for example, I use it a lot when in World War II missions, I have big engagements, and there's one flight and an enemy flight, big formations, crossing paths, and I can never be sure at what distance the AI is going to detect the other and start attacking. And even if with a lot of trial and error I figured it out, then later on it can change with an update. Like right now it's 5 miles, but after the next update it's 6 miles, and after that it's 3 miles, and they react, and it's inconsistent. You cannot trust that. So I set up both units as weapons hold, so don't fight. And as soon as they are within a range of each other, let's say whatever, 21,000 feet, that's close enough. So as soon as this unit is inside the moving zone around this one, then I pull those tasks out of the bag. Remember what I talked about at the beginning? And I tell them, weapons free, engage. And then I can be sure, I can prepare with voiceovers and everything. I can predict exactly when they're gonna go weapons hot. And of course there's unit outside moving zone, when the player leaves formation, whatever. Units AGL altitude higher or lower, or normal altitude higher or lower. This is quite useful, for example, when you want something to happen when the player took off, then units above ground altitude higher than, I don't know, 10. This is meters, careful. then something happens. That means the player took off. Or units AGL altitude lower than 1 or lower than 2, it means the player has landed. You can combine it with something else like units. You have a whole lot of flight parameters here. Unit speed lower than player, let's say 1 knot. Like the player is stationary and it's not a stall because he's under 2 feet. You can be sure that he landed and is on the ground, and that's when something happens, like mission complete or whatever. But you have all kinds of stuff like bank in limits or heading. With heading, you should be very careful, because here you can check true headings, but magnetic heading will always be different, and what you need over there is magnetic heading. Where are we? Vertical speed, climbing, descending, pitch, pointing up or down, or level flight. If you combine these, you can create fairly accurate triggers. I use these a lot in my upcoming campaign with Paco, the Tomcat RAG campaign, Speed and Angels. So the way I know a player started a loop, for example, is that I knew that he was in level flight before, and then the pitch is within the limits of, say, 40 and 90, so at least the nose is pointing at least 40 degrees up. Then I can be sure the loop has been started. Or after the loop, I know that when the player's pitch is within -5 and 5, then he's in level flight, and so on and so forth. You can be very creative with combining these speed, vertical speed, all that stuff. Now this is more voodoo kind of stuff. Cockpit argument in range. You can link triggers to events within the cockpit. So as soon as a switch is flipped, let's say the landing gear lever is pushed down, and you figure out the landing gear's lever's argument is whatever 357, and it's pushed down, so it's between -1 and, let's say, -0.5. It's a lot of trial and error. This value you can find under, let's see if I know by heart, mods, then aircraft. You select the aircraft, folder called Cockpit, and then clickable data, I think, .lua file, and you open it, and each switch and lever and everything will have an argument number. That's what you're looking for, and then you look for the landing gear lever or whatever your story requires, and then I usually just create a quick mission and experiment with if it's lowered, then what's its value. Maybe it's -1 or +1. It's between two values. And as soon as you have that, you can have something to happen, like gear down call or whatever. Cockpit parameter equals 2. Now this is interesting. I used it for my Huey campaign. I'm going to talk about voiceovers more, but with this one, you can have a trigger condition depending on what your radios are set to. So if your VHF, whatever the cockpit parameter is called, it's also in one of those files, I don't know, VHF radio or COM1. It will have a name, something like that. You have to find it in those files. And then the value is 252.5, whatever frequency you want. Then you know the player is on the right frequency. So in my Paradise Lost campaign, I wanted the radio calls only to happen if the player is on the correct frequency. But instead of using actual radio transmissions, I will talk about it later, because the first thing to be destroyed or damaged when the Huey is hit is the radios. And as soon as the player is hit, which he's going to be hit, then the triggers won't fire. So that's not good. That's why I added an additional condition line. So as long as the player's radio 1, 2, VHF, whatever is tuned to whichever frequency, only then the player should hear a voiceover. So this is another way. It's quite a pain in the neck because you have to set up extra criteria, and this is quite unlikely to work in multiplayer. I'm not sure where it all stands, but the more cockpit arguments, switches, cockpit parameters you use, the more you risk multiplayer compatibility, and that's why I'm trying to steer clear of co-op versions and multi-crew versions, because it's just not going to work with these kinds of triggers. Or I cannot be sure, I cannot guarantee, and I don't want that. So these are the conditions. Again, a gazillion of them, and if you combine them, you can virtually prepare for anything in your mission. You just have to be creative. Now that we have the condition, we can make stuff happen. AI task push or AI task set. Remember what I said about the tasks here in the bag? Aerobatics. So here, let's give a new one. If as soon as flag whatever 7 comes on, I want that unit to do a loop. AI task push, and here I will have a list of all kinds of tasks in those bags. Both have a loop. Was it the player or the lead? That's why you need to name them correctly, and then you check it. Yeah, that's the player. It's gone, whatever. AI task push, loop, player, and then it's going to happen. Now, what's the difference between push and set? Push means, so the AI has a list of stuff he has to do, or it has to do, whatever. When you give him an AI task push, the selected task goes on top of that list. So that's his number one priority, but it doesn't make the rest of the stuff go away. It still wants to do those as well. But if you use AI task set, you tell him, forget everything you've been doing, like orbiting, or you had another aerobatics, it was doing turns, and then you say, forget about the turns completely, and now do a loop. That's AI task set. It's a bit of a hit or miss. Sometimes one works, the other doesn't, and then vice versa. It's still a bit of a mystery to me. Like on paper, that's how it works, the way I explained, but in reality, it's a gray area. I haven't been able to completely figure out the AI. Begin playing actor, no idea. Capture the flag, do script file, do script. This can be important. I'm very bad at scripts, but there are people like Grimes who are masters of these, and they can give you a bunch of code and you paste it here, and you can make stuff happen that is not possible with the regular set of triggers. I use some of these in my missions because some things can only be achieved with scripts, but I like to keep them to a minimum, because as soon as DCS is an ever-changing environment under constant development. As soon as something happens and the script stops working, I would just be looking at a bunch of code here and have no idea what went wrong. So let's do script. But for example, a script is what I use for Fox calls. So there's a script that turns on 3 different flags depending on what kind of missile a given unit fires. Fox 1, Fox 2, Fox 3, and then the flag comes on and the radio call is made, I don't know, Sniper 1, Fox 2. Script file. you can paste the code here, or you can have it in a file and just open it somewhere. Same stuff. Effect smoke, that's pretty good. When I want to like enhance the effects of a bombing, where's the island? Let's say the player has to bomb this airfield here. Let's call it target. And then we'll have trigger zone. The size doesn't matter. That's what she said. Smoke 1. And then copy paste it. Smoke 2. So when the player bombs or the AI bombs this airfield, then we want those big smoke effects to appear. How do we do that? So as soon as the airfield is bombed, and you'll figure out what conditions you put here, bomb in zone, or you place some units here, like a bunch of soldiers, and if any one of them is damaged or hurt, that means the bombs have been dropped and hit. And then effects, smoke, smoke 1, and you can select whichever smoke, I don't know, huge smoke and fire, and then zone smoke 2, you want a large smoke and fire for the sake of variety. And that can enhance the effects, the looks of the destruction. And you can make it stop if you want. I never wanted to make it stop. End mission, I've never used it. Like when, I don't know, mission success criteria is met, then you can end the mission, say mission complete, and then game over. I hate this. I want the player to be able to return to base, taxi back to the hangar, get out and admire the aircraft for another 10 minutes, or assess the damage, count the bullet holes, whatever. It's up to the player. In my missions, it's always up to the player to end the mission. But you can do this. Explode unit. This can be quite useful. You can select whichever unit, aircraft or ground unit or ship, whatever, to explode. Sometimes I want to kill a character sorry, in a mission. You have to experiment with the explosion size. Sometimes 1 or 2 will suffice. Sometimes if it's a ship, you want, I don't know, 500, whatever. Experiment. Or let's say there's a ship and you're not sure that it's going to be sunk, so as soon as it's damaged, like unit damaged, ship, then explode unit, ship, to make sure it's gone, because you want the mission, in the mission it's absolutely necessary that the ship explodes, whatever. So you can cheat with this one quite a lot. You can have an explosion. It's also some like effects, like when the bombs are dropped, you can have an explosion in the center of a trigger zone, like smoke 1. There's gonna be a 500 kilogram explosion, and also smoke and fire generated. It's Hollywood stuff. Flag decrease, increase if you have values. Flag on, flag off. This is super important. I already told you about this. So as soon as I reach a stage of a mission, like something happens, I put a flag on. And each event has their flags, and later I can use those flags as conditions, like something has already happened but something else hasn't, so that flag is false, or time since a given flag, so on and so forth. Flag set to random value, I already talked about this. Group activate. This can be quite useful as well. At mission start, you don't want all the units to be here, because that's gonna cost performance, and also like the sooner the AI spawns, the longer time elapses between whenever it's needed, and then you don't exactly know where it's going to be, what it's going to do, maybe run out of fuel, you don't know. But if you want this guy to meet this guy, then you can set him to late activation, so he's not going to be here. And when, let's say, the player flies like this, and when the player is inside zone bomb, so he enters the zone called bomb, then group activate lead. So if the player flies like this, then chances are they're gonna meet. See what I mean? And then you have much more control over the AI. And also you can deactivate units, like big bomber formation after the player leaves the bombers and they are RTB, you can deactivate them, because as long as they're present in the mission, they're going to cost performance. So group activate, group deactivate, AI off, AI on, I don't know, never use it, just activate, deactivate, highlight unit, whatever, illuminating bomb, never had to use it, but I guess it's pretty cool. Load mission. I only recently learned about this. At any given point in a mission, you can have a different mission to load. And that's pretty cool. For example, I flew the Constant Bag campaign from Banyap, and I loved it. And it's set up in a way that each mission has different stages. And each stage has its own mission file. And when you reach that stage, then a new mission file loads. And I'm going to use the same technique in my upcoming Tomcat campaign, the training, the RAG with Paco, Speed and Angels, because in one flight you can practice a whole lot of stuff. I don't know, let's say whatever, close formation, then breakup rendezvous, and then shackle maneuver, and so on and so forth. You cannot rely on the AI to do all that properly, each task one after the other. So for each task I set up a new mission, and also this gives you the advantage that after the task is complete, I can give the player the option, I'm going to show you how, whether they want to repeat the task and then load mission and select the same mission, and the player can repeat it and practice once again if it wasn't clear or whatever, or move on to the next one and then load mission and you select the next mission. So it can be quite useful. You can do cool stuff. Mark to all, mark to collision, mark. These marks are when you're in the F10 map. Let's say I have a target trigger zone here. So I'm going to call it target, and it's the trigger zone target. So after this point in the mission, when the player goes to the F10 map, then he's going to see a red circle here, and if he clicks on the circle, it's going to say target or whatever you type here. Mark to collision, mark to group. It only matters in multiplayer, because in single player there's only one player. But if you build a multiplayer mission, you can play around with these. Same for, you remember when I said unit inside zone, unit outside zone, you can play with group in zone, part of coalition in zone, all of coalition zone, but that's more for multiplayer missions. Where was I? Mark to all, message to all. This is what I use a lot. I can use it for subtitles, for voiceovers. This is in the top right corner, white text with black background. You type whatever you want here. And this is how long it's going to be displayed, and then it fades out. Clear view means that it overwrites the previous message. So maybe you can have a message for 1,000 seconds, or 10,000, whatever, so as long as something else happens. And then later on, when that thing happens, like the player's input, press spacebar to do something, then, I don't know, bombs away, or Taliban. Press spacebar to, yeah, I'm gonna talk about it later, but yeah, press spacebar to call out the bandits. It's gonna be on screen for 1,000 seconds. I don't want this to go away. It's gonna be in the top right corner. And then when the player presses spacebar, I'm gonna show you how. It says, Tally bandits. That doesn't have to be 1,000 seconds long. It's only like 5, but you want it clear view. If it's not clear view, this line is gonna appear underneath the press spacebar message. But if it's clear view, then it's going to remove all messages that have been on screen until that point. So make sure this is checked. It can be, yeah, you can do message to coalition, country, group. This is again for multiplayer. In single player, there's only one player, so it doesn't really matter. It might as well be message to all. But if you build a multiplayer mission and you want only the red side to hear stuff, yeah, then message to all is not very convenient, because then the blue side would hear that too. Picture clear, picture to all is the same as message. This is a new feature. I love it. You can select a picture file and display it on screen. It can be a PNG with transparent background. You can come up with really cool stuff, then place it wherever you want. It can also be clear view, same as with the messages. You can go very creative, and you can use it in multiplayer too. Play argument, not really sure what that is, never used it. Radio item, add and remove. Again, other versions for multiplayer. This is when, you know, when you use the stock radio menu, and you can call the ATC, AWACS, or Wingman, whatever. There's a menu that says Other, the F10 menu, and if you select that, you have a list of stuff that you added here. So for example, you have, in the Zone 5 campaign, you can use the F10 radio menu to call out the wildcard. So tally wildcard. So this is gonna be in the menu as an option. And if the player selects it, then flag whatever 500 comes on. You can even give it a value, but I don't usually play around with that. So it's in the F10 menu, and when the player sees the wildcard, he selects radio F10 tally wildcard, and then flag 500 will come on. So you add the new line. If flag 500 is true, then you play the message tally wildcard. And at that point, you can also remove previously added radio menu items. You just have to have the same name. It's better to copy paste. Radio transmission. These are it can be a sound file transmitted on a given frequency at a given point. So in the center of the trigger zone that you select here. I use it, for example, like in my upcoming Mosquito campaign, you can tune into the BBC. So I have a trigger zone called BBC, and I have the music file selected. I have the frequency selected, power, and it goes on and on. Of course, you have to select loop, or if you select set up a beacon, and you have a Morse code file here, and it's being transmitted. If you don't select loop, it goes on once, and then your beacon is gone. But if you have this on, like it's being looped, then it goes on forever. Make sure you don't forget this. Remove mark. Oh yeah, remember about the F10 menu marks. You can remove them anytime you want. Scenery destruction zone. That's pretty cool. For example, in your previous mission, the airfield was destroyed, or maybe these buildings, and you have this over here. So at mission start, or whenever you want, inside the zone target, the destruction level should be from 0 to 100, like you can have 100 if it's a complete destruction. Or if you want to simulate a war zone or a front line, you just add these destruction zones. Be careful, it makes, like it gives you a little pause, and the game loads and stutters a bit, and at the end, when you finish the mission, at the mission results screen, it's going to give you a lot of unit dead or whatever kinds of messages, and that can overload the system a bit, so go easy on this one. Scenery remove objects zone. Another useful stuff, for example, I was notified, let's switch to satellite view, in my Paradise Lost campaign, the player starts here, the Hueys are here, and I was notified that there's this yellow bus, this modern bus. So I just create the trigger zone, call it bus, and at mission start, I don't even need a condition, because at mission start, whatever happens, I want scenery, remove object zone, bus, trees only, objects only, whatever you want. In my case, objects only. And that means the player won't see this modern boss in 1968, and it won't break immersion. No idea what these mean. ATC to silent mode. You can select whatever airfield, and then if it's silent, then you won't hear the stock automatic radio calls, ATC calls. Set briefing, not really. Set failure. Yeah, first I have to have a player aircraft, which I don't have yet. It's called player, but it's not player yet. Now it's a player. Set failure, and for the player aircraft you have a whole lot of things that can be damaged, like at a given point in the mission I want the engine to be destroyed, or one of the magnetos to fail, prop governor fail, or whatever. You can assign a probability here, and within how many minutes, within 20 minutes or 1 minute or 0.5. No, you cannot do 0.5. That's the thing. That's something I would love to have changed, like maybe have it immediately, because 1 minute is the minimum. So you want, I don't know, engine destroyed, and then afterwards you want a radio message called, oh shit, the engine is gone. You don't know when exactly the engine will be gone within that minute, because from here on it either happens in 2 seconds or 60 seconds, and you don't exactly know when the radio call should come. Maybe there's a way, I'm just not aware. Set flag value, talked about that. Internal cargo, or cargo on unit. This is quite useful. This is what I used in my Paradise Lost campaign. When the player picks up cargo from a base or drops cargo, then I can make the helo, I don't know, 500 kilograms heavier or lighter. I can change the cargo weight. It's not visible in game, but you can play around with this. So when they pick up troops, then the player actually feels the weight of the troops in the way the aircraft flies. I also used this to simulate the weaker engines on the older model Hueys when the player flies gunships. So the player flies with, I don't know the exact number, just giving you something like an extra 1,000 kilograms of invisible cargo, which is the equivalent of a weaker engine. Shelling zone, that's also Hollywood. You set up a zone, let's say the RTP zone. We want Anderson to be shelled, and what's that, RTB, how big you want the explosions to be and how many shells you want to land, and then poof, 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 everywhere. It's a big shelling. It can be costly in terms of performance, but it can look cool. show helper gates for unit. You know, in training missions, when you have those green gates you have to fly through, if you have show helper gates, then at each waypoint, one of these will appear. Signal flare on unit. Signal flare is happening in the middle of a trigger zone, but it can happen where a unit is. Again, pretty straightforward. You can select the color, maybe give takeoff permission to the player. You can go creative. It's very self-explanatory. Smoke marker, again, used a lot in the Paradise Lost campaign when, I don't know, the alert team pops smoke, and when the player is there and calls them on the radio, then smoke will be popped in the middle of the trigger zone that you select. What was the name of it? Smoke 2, whatever, red smoke. They fade away after a certain time. Sound stops, sound to all. Again, same as sound to collision, country group. This is for multiplayer, but sound to all is super important. This is one way to set up voiceovers, and voiceovers are one of the most important parts of campaigns. Here you can select WAV files or OGG files. OGGs are way smaller, which results in much smaller mission files. But even with OGGs, my missions can be up to 30 megabytes, and that's a lot to handle. So go easy on the WAV files. And then that sound file will be played. Again, sound to all means everybody hears it, no matter what. It's not coming through the radio, even if the player has I don't know, bailed out and hanging on a parachute, would still hear this. So it's less realistic than radio transmissions, unless, like I told you, you give an extra condition, and the condition says if the radio is tuned to this and that frequency. But this has nothing to do with the radios. I use this in my World War II campaigns, where, of course, they have, like, the player has different radio channels for different stuff, but even if you don't switch channels, I didn't want stuff not to work, so I use sound to all because it's more fail-safe. I will show you why. The other way to use voiceovers is actual transmissions. I'm going to show you this. You have a radio station, let's call it radio, let's make it a Jeep, and then remember, perform command, set frequency, whichever frequency you want, and then you set up, like, put tasks in the bag. Perform command, transmit message, you select the sound file, and then here you can add the subtitle. This subtitle, as opposed to the message to all, this one is here and in white only with no background. So you have a sound file that says bombs away, and then the subtitle says bombs away. The subtitle is visible for 5 seconds. And it's not looped. So when something happens, you want AI task push, and then you select the task of the radio unit to bombs away, and then he's going to play that radio transmission on that frequency. And if the player has a radio on and tuned to that frequency, then he's going to hear it. But if the radio is shut up or he's on the wrong frequency, he's not going to hear it. There's another problem with this. In multiplayer, it doesn't work. Sometimes it loops forever and the subtitles flood the screen. Also, sometimes radio transmissions that shouldn't collide and overlap, they still overlap somehow, and you don't really hear them or don't hear the reply. it would require a bit of work and fixing from ED, but still I use it for my modern day campaigns, like the Tomcat campaigns, where it's really important which channel the player is listening to. Another advice, if you have the player talk to the lead, you don't want to put the player's messages in the player's so-called bag, and the lead's messages in the lead's bag, and then in the triggers you pull out the player's message and then the lead's message, because they're coming from different sources, and then even if you space them apart, sometimes they still just kill each other. It's quite bugged. You don't want that. You want a unit, a ground unit, or maybe an air unit, like you have a C-130 circling at 30,000 feet here, and all of the messages should be coming from that C-130, both the player's messages and the lead's messages, because then it will be the same volume as well, and they won't interfere, hopefully, or maybe yes. And with radio transmissions, as I said, you already have the subtitles as well. But if you use sound to all, and then you select the file that says bombs away, you still need subtitles, so you have to have another line here. You guessed correctly, message to all, bombs away. So it's a bit of a double work, but it's more fail-safe. Where was I? Yeah, sound to all. Static active, deploy, playing actor. You can stop a radio transmission if you want. Unit A, I don't know, no idea, never used it. Cockpit highlight element. That's pretty cool for training missions. You can have those green flashing things over a given cockpit element. Again, you have to open those Lua files and look for the name of that given switch, whatever, paste it here. You have to give it a unique ID, and whichever number you want. Just make sure you haven't given it before. Leave this at 0, that's going to be automatic, and it's going to flash until remove highlight, and then whatever number you gave it, you just paste it here, and then the flashing will stop. Never used it. Set command. I think I only use it for active pause, like for example, the beginning of training missions. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm doing this by heart, but I think it's 8:16, and then the game will be active paused. And if you set it again, then it unpauses. Or set command with value. It's also some voodoo stuff, but for example, an example off the top of my head, command 10010 is a command to shut gesture up in the Tomcat. So if it's set to 1, it means gesture will be silenced, and then you can have whatever you want, and then later you can allow him to speak again. Then again, set command with value, and the value should be 0. But again, you need a list of these commands and play around with those. Start listen, never used it. Start wait user response. This is super important. In my missions, a lot of things happen based on the input of the player. And you see a lot of messages saying, press spacebar to, I don't know, check in with focus, or press spacebar to call tally ho, whatever. Then at that point, I set this up. I also set up message to all. Press space bar to begin with focus. Of course, this should be long enough, because if the player doesn't press it in 10 seconds, then this is gone, and then they will have no idea, or they will forget they have to press the spacebar. So let's say 1,000 seconds. and then it's waiting for the user's response. Flag continue, which means if they press the spacebar, unfortunately it has to be the spacebar, you cannot switch it to any other buttons. Then it should be flag whatever 72. Flag back if they press backspace. You can give them a choice. I never use it, but if it's a binary choice, you can give it another number. So you're waiting for the player to check in with focus, and as soon as they press spacebar, flag 72 will come on, and then the next line should be flag is true 72, which means the player pressed the spacebar. Then you have a sound file with the voiceover, and focus, this is, I don't know, sniper 1 checking in. Again, the length of this should be matching like more or less the length of the sound file. And remember to click clear view, because as soon as the player checks in, you want the previous message, so this one, press spacebar, because it's irrelevant, you want this to be removed. So this should be clear view. And that's it. So as you see, I have no idea what half of this stuff does still. Maybe one day I'll figure out, and then it will give me even more possibilities and options to play around with. But already what I'm using and what we have here is insane. The possibilities are endless, especially if you combine them. There's almost nothing that cannot be done in the mission editor. Like there's no event you cannot prepare for. Oh wait, I just realized, okay, this is totally random and really unstructured, but I forgot something. The switch to waypoint, this is something I use a lot as well. Let's say this is the lead, you're the player, and the lead flies like this, and then to waypoint 2. And for the mission's sake, you want the lead to say, okay, we reached waypoint 1, let's switch to waypoint 2. Or, nothing to see here, let's turn west. But the AI will start its turn somewhere here and then finish it somewhere there, but you cannot exactly predict, and even if you do, trial and error, it can change, and it will change from update to update. So you want to make sure that the player starts breaking west exactly when you want it to do that. So here's what you do. The player only sees his own waypoint. You move it here, and then you put an action in the bag. Perform command. No, perform command. Switch to waypoint. And that's waypoint 2. Yeah, that's waypoint 2. Break west. So what you can do is have them fly on information, the player follows, and then when the lead is inside the zone called bomb, he will say, okay, the enemy is not here, let's turn west and look for them on the other side of the island. And then you say, or the player's character says, Roger, and then 1 second later you want the player to turn west. So you set up the different lines with the voiceovers, and 1 second later, time since flag, AI task push or AI task set, break west, which means the lead will forget about waypoint 1, doesn't want to reach waypoint 1 anymore, but flies directly on to waypoint 2. So it's a bit of a pain to set up, but you have way more control over over the AI like this when and how they change waypoints. You can also set up loops with this, like you want an infantry unit to walk in a triangle, run around in the airfield, because, I don't know, it's just atmospheric. You want stuff to happen in the airfield, but as soon as he reaches this point, he will stop. But if you add over here, perform command, go to waypoint 0, he will go to waypoint 0, then waypoint 1, then waypoint 2, and as soon as he reaches waypoint 2, you see, under waypoint 2 he has a task, go to waypoint 0, and repeat forever. So that's pretty cool. You can set up tankers that way if you want a tanker track that is bigger than a built-in racetrack pattern, or an orbit, like a huge tanker track, whatever, anything you want. At mission 3, add perform command mission 3, waypoint 3, switch to waypoint 0. So it will fly like this, 1, 2, 3, oh, I have to go to waypoint 0, and then again, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. It's pretty cool. Okay, this was not very organized, but I think I pretty much talked about most of the triggers that I use. So it's not rocket science, it's pretty self-explanatory. You just have to experiment a lot and be very creative with the conditions, because usually you will have a lot, but the more conditions you have, the more accurately you can have your triggers or voiceovers to fire, and the cooler the player's experience will be. But of course, in order to have lots of conditions here, you have to predict what's going to be happening in the mission, and the player never exactly follows the briefings or deviates from the route, you know. So that's kind of the art here, to balance these things. But again, the more accurately you can predict the player's behavior, the cooler stuff you can set up here, and the more immersive the experience you can make for the player. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. It was very random, I was just rambling, but I hope you found some useful bits of information here that you will be able to use for your own missions. Just go to the mission editor, experiment, and it will come naturally. Yeah, so I hope this helped. Again, thank you so much for all the support that I got from you after the video I released last week. And stay tuned, because I'm gonna be announcing some really cool stuff soon. And I also have a new mosquito tutorial coming. So yeah, a lot of cool cards up my sleeve. Yeah, so make sure you subscribe and stay tuned. Okay, see ya.